I'm sorry for your loss. I am so sorry for your loss. You let me know if you need anything, okay? She was a great girl. I'm really sorry for your loss. Those were the variations of condolences I was offered as I stood between my mother and brother, staring distantly at the oaken foot of my sister's casket. The words were usually followed up with a half-hearted, cringe-worthy embrace by a bunch of strangers who I would rather not touch me. None of it made me feel any better. If anything, it was worse. I had been standing there, cemented in the same spot, for an hour. Maybe. I was forced to stay in an uncomfortable position while a horde of people filed past me and my family and paid their respects. I didn't know hardly any of them, though, and I didn't care to have some stranger tell me how bad they felt for me. They didn't feel anything for me or my poor sister. They were there for appearances, to look good in front of their peers. No one wanted to be the family who didn't show their face at the poor dead girl's visitation. That was a problem with large, small towns. Everyone was connected to one another. They knew everything about everyone, but it didn't mean that everyone knew each other, especially when it came to someone as antisocial as I. My mother played the small-town game well. She most certainly knew each face that showed up to tell us they were sorry for our loss. I knew if any of their children were to pass away unexpectedly, she would be there with her black sun hat and red lipstick to express how sad she was that said kid had passed. She was no different than any of them. No one in this town was even the slightest bit of sincere. Wow, they did a good job on her, an older man mumbled to his wife as they leaned over my sister's coffin. They glanced between her face and the picture set up beside her. It was one of me and her hugging and smiling. I could see the gentle acceptance on the man's face. I won who she got. I caught myself growling slightly at that. My sister's dead, and you're impressed with what the mortician did? No respect. No real respect. I had heard that she did look impeccable, however. I didn't know firsthand because I couldn't bear to look at her. I couldn't force my eyes to focus on the still lifeless face of my once loving and lively sister. My mother had said it had been some sort of miracle of nature. She had died more than 2 weeks ago, and they had managed to preserve her like it was the minute her heart had stopped. I had seen dead bodies before. They looked waxy and unreal, like something you might see in those museums with those statues of actors. You know, the ones backwoods people who will never be anywhere near Hollywood go to in order to feel close to those snooty rich people who call themselves actors and musicians. It always disturbed me how unreal morticians made some bodies, and I didn't want to risk glancing at her and seeing a fake doll. I didn't care what anyone said. It wasn't worth the mental scarring it might have caused me if they turned out to be wrong. "Rebecca, how are you doing, dear?" An elderly lady who I recognized as my mother's book club friend, Mrs. Kenneth, questioned to my mother. She placed her hands on her shoulders and looked her deep in the eyes. Mom sighed. "It's hard, Lillian. Parents aren't supposed to outlive their children." She sniffled and rubbed her eye. I had heard the same old line 1,000 times already. She played the role well, but their relationship had been estranged. Truly, I knew at least a part of my mother thought that having the shame that she believed my sister was removed from my family would be best for her image. One step closer to having the perfect household that she always wanted, if only I wasn't in the way. "Helena was a good girl," Mrs. Kenneth lied. "I know how proud you were of her." She squeezed my mother again, who pretended to sniffle. When the old woman pulled back, she glanced over at me, but offered nothing more than a nod and a look of indifference. At least that was better than the fake "I'm sorry for your loss" everyone else offered. She moved right past me to embrace my little brother. I sighed, fidgeting in my spot, looking at the never-ending line of mourners that were meant to pass by us to offer their sympathies, and uncaringly glance one last time at Helena Thorne, town troublemaker. Stop this endless torture! I wanted to shout, as I longed for nothing more than to be back in my dark room with my music blaring loud, where I could cry and mourn my sister like a normal person. I didn't need this parade, and neither did Hunter. I fidgeted again, feeling my legs turning numb from how long I had been standing completely still in one place. I could feel my mom's blue eyes turn to me, glaring at the side of my face. I tried my best to ignore her, but when she dug her fake ruby-red nails into my forearm, I was forced to look at her as I ripped away from her grasp. "Quit that," she practically hissed at me. I sighed, trying not to focus on my aching legs. As much as I hated this, I wanted to keep the peace for as long as possible. Not for Mom and her charade, but for Hunter. I didn't want to spoil her memory by causing a fight in front of all of Crystal Creek. This was all just becoming too much for me to take. "Rebecca!" Another shrill but familiar voice called. "Tiffany!" my mother howled. But she didn't break our family line. Instead, she waited for her best friend to rush to her. She cut the line, something that made Mom scowl, but she didn't say anything. The two hugged, looking almost like photo-negative twins. Tiffany wore a tight dark blue skirt and a low-cut black blouse. Her blonde hair was done up in a high bun. Her full lips were streaked with powder pink lipstick to match her flaming cheeks. Mother wore red where Tiffany wore blue, and her hair hung down in long dark brown braid. The two never coordinated their outfits. It just always sort of happened. Tiffany was a year younger than my mom, but almost looked my age. When Hunter and I prodded her about how she stayed so youthful, she would just smile, wink, and say that it was an old Tyrell trick. I didn't doubt that story. Her mother, Linda Tyrell, looked practically 50 at 75. Mother and Tiffany had been high school friends, and they had stuck together even after Mom left Crystal Creek to be with my father. Tiffany always said that Mother was her soulmate, and I would believe it if they weren't so opposite. "This line is crazy," Tiffany hummed, looking down at those who were unfortunate enough to be stuck within its confines. "It's orderly," Mom said, squinting in disapproval at her friend. "And you wouldn't have been stuck in it if you hadn't been late. Beauty takes time." My mother rolled her eyes as she released her friend from her grasp. That gave the perky blonde time to turn her blue gaze to me. "Ophelia," she whispered in sadness. She looked me up and down, taking in my black dress and boots. "Well, at least you're keeping tradition." "I like tradition," I had started to say, but my mother cut me off. "Tiff, her entire wardrobe is 75% black," she said, turning her cold blue eyes onto me. Nothing I ever did pleased her. "True. Well, black is slimming." She patted my belly as she moved past me and onto Maxwell. "Hey, Maxie." She handed him a piece of candy. That was her thing. She always brought candy. She used to give it to me when I was younger, but had stopped when Max was born. I was too old for such things, Mom had said, obviously meaning it was her doing and not Tiffany's. She squeezed my 8-year-old half-brother. He hugged her back for a second. When she leaned away, he glanced around and popped the piece of chocolate in his mouth, chewing with a big smile on his face. Then it was on to my stepfather. "Jack," she said simply, patting him on the shoulder. Jack and Tiffany hated each other, but neither of them ever put my mother in the middle. I could commend them both for that, at least. Tiff took a seat at the pew as far away from my stepdad as possible. She opened her compact and began to tap at her face with powder. I turned my attention away from her and towards the burning sensation of eyes on my back. It was my mother, of course. "You really should dress in more colors," she said quietly. "Black is just so sad. I mean, dear, you look deader than Helena." I could feel a lump rise in my throat. I tried to swallow it, but it just allowed the anger to seep into my stomach. "Who says something like that about their daughter?" I snapped, unable to stop myself. My voice had risen a little more than I had meant. The sound of ambient chatting drowned out most of it, but the front of the line definitely heard me. "Ophelia," my mother warned. She tried to grab me, but I took a step back. "No, Mom, I can't do this anymore." I broke the family line, storming away from them, past my sister's casket and down the aisle between the pews. I didn't care what anyone thought of me. It's not like their opinions were high anyway. I was a weird girl, the quiet kid who sat alone drowning out the world with her music. I didn't get in much trouble, but I didn't stand out either. I wasn't used to the spotlight, but now I was the girl with the dead sister. I would get attention no matter what, and I certainly didn't want it. My mom had always been that way. She was judgmental and insulting. She was a snob, even when we didn't have a lot of money. However, when she and my dad were still together, she at least loved us. She tried. When she married Jack and had Maxwell, it was all over. Hunter and I were pushed aside for her normal child. Max was actually managing to live up to those expectations. He made good grades and did exactly as he was told. He was a kid my mom always wanted. I glanced back at my family. Mom stared after me in anger. Jack looked annoyed, and Max had the same smug look he always had that said, "Ooh, you're in trouble." I didn't care. I didn't need any of this. Hunter would understand. Mom turned as a young man approached her. I couldn't see her expression, but I assumed it had morphed back to her mourning mother guise. I recognized this guy as Hunter's ex-boyfriend. They had dated for around a month when he tried to hit her during a fight. She told the story as if she went full-blown ninja on his ass, but in truth I knew she had just managed to move around him. She grabbed his arm and, with a twist, snapped it over her knee. He had been so mad about that, but he dare not confront her again. He was scared of her after that, and I found that funny. I didn't know why he was here, though. She certainly wouldn't want him showing his face. To gloat, no doubt. He wanted to see the girl who had shamed him and his manhood in a lower place than she had put him. He wanted to confirm that she had what was coming to her. No one cared about Hunter like I did. No one loved her like me. Not Mom, not my brother, not my stepdad. Not my absentee paternal dad. No one. It had been just me and her against the world. And now she was no longer in it. She had left me alone in a hostile place to fend for myself. I didn't blame her. Not really. I don't know who or what I blamed, but I wanted to find someone. At the time, I placed it on my mother. That was before I knew the truth, however. I made it from the nave of the church to the little side room where the Sunday school classes would meet. I plopped down in one of the wooden chairs inside. I just wanted to be alone. "Ozzy," a voice called after me. It wasn't one that belonged to my parents, or even one of their minions. No, this voice was a little less familiar, something that I didn't flinch at the sound of. I looked over to see him walk in. Shane. Shane was my sister's fiancé, or widower. Is that acceptable to call him? I don't know, but they were together for 5 years, 3 of which she had spent living with him in New Orleans. They had met online somehow when she was 15 and he was 23. When she was 17, she ran away from home to join him. That was the first time she had left me. Shane was tall and thin. He was kind of cute, or he used to be. I'd only met Shane once before, and that was when he came to pick Hunter up to leave. Then his skin had been pink and his face full and lively. Now he was pale, and his cheeks were sunken in. He had purple circles under his tired, moss-colored eyes. His straw hair was messy and tangled. It was clear he didn't care how he looked, and I was sure he didn't sleep much anymore. Perhaps there was at least one other person that cared that my sister was gone. "Ozzy," he said again, looking down at me sadly. His eyes were red where he had obviously been crying. He flicked on the light before sitting in the chair across from me. "You okay?" "What a dumb question to ask," I mumbled, looking at my knees. "Of course I'm not okay." He sighed. "Your mother was pretty harsh on you." "You should have seen her this morning. No crying, no fidgeting, and no sniffling. Be quiet, proper, and respectful." "Fuck you." Shane nodded. "I understand now why Hunter wanted to leave. That woman is something. For the few days that Shane had been down, he and my mom had been fighting incessantly. First, it had been over minor funeral details. Then it had been over his right to be buried next to her when he passed away in the distant future. Eventually, it escalated to my mother not wanting Shane staying with us while people paid their respects. "You aren't her family, and no one here knows you," my mother had argued. "I loved her more than you ever did," he rebutted. But it didn't matter to Mom. She kept up until the poor man begrudgingly agreed to stand by separately from the rest of us. Then he stormed from our house in anger with hot tears in his eyes. Today he did as my mother had demanded. Each of the visitors passed right by him, not even aware that he meant anything to my sister, when in fact he was her everything. She told me that over and over before she had even met him face to face. When she left, I believed it to be fate. He was the love of her life, and he made her happy. I guess that's what really counted. I guess I felt bad for him. I knew he was taking it hard. Hell, it was plain on his face. "Yeah, she's something. A bitch," Shane snickered. "I feel awkward out there. I don't know anybody. Neither do I, and I live here. They're people my mom knows. She knows everyone. That's crazy." I nodded inside, pulling my knees to my chest. We sat in silence for a few minutes before Shane finally spoke up. "She missed you every day, you know," he said. I glanced at him, dabbing at my eyes that were attempting to leak. "Didn't seem like it," I grumbled. That was a lie. I knew my sister loved me. I was just angry with her. "She talked about you constantly. Hunter wished she could have taken you with us when she left, but you were a kid. You needed your parents. We couldn't just take you away. She was a kid too, Shane, and you took her away from me." "I know. I'm sorry. She talked about getting you, but by the time you were old enough, things were complicated." "How so, He looked down, as if conflicted by his answer. "She wouldn't want you upset," he said instead, deflecting my question. I sighed. I hated that. "Of course she wouldn't want me upset. I hate when people say that. It's so stupid. No dead person wants their loved ones crying and mourning. But it's gonna happen anyway. I still miss her, so I'm still going to be upset." Shane shook his head. "Ozzy, stop, Shane. Just leave me alone. Go back out there." All I wanted was a few minutes of my own to cry and be a normal person. I squeezed my knees to my chest, buried my face, and sobbed. I think I was there for maybe an hour. I figured the line would be gone, but I could still hear chatting voices echoing from inside. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I needed fresh air. On my escape from the Sunday school room, I saw that the line was indeed gone. I could see my mother in a crowd of other middle-aged women, along with Tiffany, whose arm was draped over her shoulder. A lady in a fur coat that I didn't recognize was squeezing Mom's hand, and, by her expression, speaking words of comfort. A comfort my mom didn't need. I dashed out the front door, luckily managing to avoid anyone who may have wanted to spark a conversation with me. The sun was warm against my face and hair. The fresh air was crisp, filling my lungs. I felt suffocated inside the church. I just needed to relax. I plopped on the bench near the front door and opened my phone. No one had texted me, and no one had come for me. The kids I sat with at lunch had passed by like everyone else, but hadn't stayed to assure I was okay. That was fine with me. I was used to being alone. I had been since Hunter left. The only friend I did have had moved away, and we could only talk via text and Skype. I found Jess in my phone and typed my message. "This sucks ass," I wrote. "Save me?" It took a minute, but eventually my phone dinged, alerting me to a response. I wish I could. I hated text spelling, but I tolerated it for her. I cared about the English language too much to butcher it, just to save a few precious seconds. "Everyone here is fake. Now you know why I had to get out of there," I sighed. Jessie's dad had gotten a job in Dallas a year ago. That was why she left. Everyone abandoned me, apparently. And my mom is the queen. Lols. Great talk. Thanks. I feel much better. I wrote, slamming my thumbs down angrily as I typed my sarcastic response. I didn't wait for a reply. I silenced my phone and stuffed it in my dress pocket. I could feel stress creeping in on me. There was no one to talk to. Everyone was such an uncaring asshole. Ugh! I took a breath, trying to force down my emotions. My fingers snaked down back into my pocket and felt down around the bottom of the cotton encasement. The tips of my fingers brushed the soft paper of the cigarette I'd snuck away from my mom before we left home. I pulled it and my lighter from its resting place. I placed it between my lips and lit it up. I just needed a little relaxation. I inhaled, allowing my lungs to fill with smoke. I had stopped smoking almost a year ago. I didn't even keep a pack around anymore. Since all this stuff with Hunter happened, though, I snagged one from my mom's pack anytime I was feeling overly anxious. I didn't want to get addicted again, but I also didn't think I could get through all this without them. Smoke scratched my throat slightly, since I wasn't keen to them any longer, but I could feel my muscles calming as I leaned back against the bench. I blew out a puff of billowy white smoke and sighed. I was such a wreck. I had dragged the cigarette almost to the butt when a voice caught my attention. "You know those things will kill you," he said from my right. I groaned, rolling my eyes. "What is it with everyone in the cheesy movie lines today?" I asked, looking towards the speaker. The cliché-despising part of me hates to admit this, but the sight of that anonymous man actually took my breath away. Like, for a second, I stopped breathing and just stared at that poor man. He didn't seem to mind, though. He noticed my expression, but just smiled at me until I got myself together. I assumed at the time, that he got looks like that a lot. The strange man was really, really attractive. Okay, he was undeniably hot. He had these wide, bright blue-green eyes, the color of the sea. His hair was straight, dark chocolate brown silk. It was long, but brushed back from his face, ending with a bit of a sweep. His skin was pale white, smooth, and verging on flawless. He wore a black suit and a white shirt, with the first few buttons on the top undone. He had a cute and oddly awkward, childlike half-smile that seemed to add a sense of innocence to what would normally be an intimidatingly self-assured man. From what I could tell at the time, he looked about 6'1" or 2. He was thin, but also seemed reasonably muscular. I blinked at him, trying to think of what to say, but I couldn't find my normally constantly present words. They were always there at the tip of my tongue, something witty or sarcastic, but at that moment my mouth was dry and nothing was present. I was left speechless. I didn't like not knowing what to say. It had left me feeling naked and defenseless. But at that moment, I just remember thinking I wouldn't mind being naked and defenseless with him. To which my face began to grow hot as I blushed. That prompted him to laugh. He took a few steps closer to me. "This is a service for Helena Thorne, right?" he asked. I'm not sure if he could sense how I was feeling and was trying to change the subject, or if he just didn't know. Still, I was able to get a handle on myself. Yeah, I said, motioning towards the front door. "It's right in there. You're a bit late, though." He moved towards the door slowly. "Ah, well, they'll get over it," I snickered. "Heh, you don't know my mom, dude." That paused him. He turned towards me, squinting. "You're Ozzy, aren't you?" He smiled a huge smile. "Hunter talked about you a lot." I blinked at the man in confusion. "That be me?" I said, phrasing my sentence in my weird casual way so that I felt a little less out of place. He nodded in understanding, his large smile growing. Hunter was my best friend. I squinted at the man. Hunter had never mentioned any male friends of hers, and I was pretty sure any man that gorgeous would be someone she would tell me about. Still, I didn't doubt him. She had grown distant during the last year of her life. The daily 1 to 2 hour calls had turned into weekly 10-minute ones. Her life had easily become a gray area. "She never mentioned you." That was a little blunt, but I didn't really care. I didn't seem to faze him, though. He offered me his hand. I'm Dorian Blackwell. I didn't want to shake his hand. I hated physical contact with strangers, especially when my mother wasn't around to scold me, but I just couldn't help myself. I reached out and wrapped my small hand around his. His skin was cool to the touch and soft against mine. His grip was strong, but gentle as he shook my hand. I found myself trembling and tried to hide it. I know he saw, however. Still, he didn't say anything or even react as if he hadn't noticed. I would introduce myself, but it seems you already know me, I mumbled, withdrawing from the contact. Hunter talked about you a lot, he repeated. I feel as if I already know you. And I know nothing of you. Dorian nodded. I understand, he said, with a ghost of a smile. You'll know me soon enough. I thought that was a bit strange, but I didn't question it. Joy, I said sarcastically. Secretly, I knew I wouldn't mind getting to know him, however. He chuckled, unhindered by my outward disinterest. He looked towards the door as if he was about to go inside, but turned around, changing his mind. He flopped on the bench beside me. I glanced at him, confused. So tell me, he said, is Shane here? Shane? Yeah, he's inside somewhere. Now that is a joy. Dorian rolled his eyes. I'm sensing a tension there. He half smiled at me. How did you ever find out? He laughed at himself. No, in truth, he and I are the best of friends. He laughed again. I understand. He's a little too serious. I don't know how he and Hunter ever stood each other. I mean, she was lighthearted and funny, and he was just a stick in the mud. She explained it to me once. She said that for he and her, it wasn't a case of having the same personality, but having a balanced personality. He was her control and she was his joy. Dorian kind of smiled at that. That sounds about right, he sighed. She was a great girl. I exhaled. My best friend. Mine too. We were silent for a few seconds. Ozzy, are you okay? I looked at him. A lot of people had asked me that today. I just smiled and nodded. I was the emotionless daughter that my mom wanted, but inside I was a wreck. Even if I didn't show it. To every other person I lied, but the tone in his voice was different. It was sincere. Probably because he understood. No, not really. I'm seriously fucked up by all of this. Yeah, I get that. I would tell you everything will be okay. Time heals the pain, but I get the feeling that that is not what you want to hear. I squinted at him. Everyone deals with grief their own way. You strike me as the kind of girl who would want to be alone for hers. Dorian didn't wait for his confirmation. He stood. I'm going to say goodbye to my friend now. He had started to turn and leave, but a ridiculous part of me called out to him. Wait! I practically yelled. He paused, glancing over his shoulder with a half-smile. I wasn't sure what my intentions had been in stopping him, so I blurted, Want an escort? Dorian chuckled, before offering me his hand. Sure. I forced myself not to take his hand. I stood on my own and moved past him towards the door. I didn't wait for him, but I could feel him following behind me. As we made our way down the aisle, he said, Damn, there is a shit ton of people here. The delight of a small town, I mumbled back. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the church drilling into my back. What was the weird goth girl doing with the sexy new stranger? Oh, the horror. Fuck them. I ignored the stares. I stopped at the foot of my sister's casket about where I had been standing earlier. I stared at the brown wood, still refusing to look at her face. Dorian stood a few feet from me, staring down at her. I managed to glance over and read his facial expressions. Sadness, pity, and towards the end, a bit of anger. He turned to me, his face relaxing. His blue-green eyes stabbed into my soul, and I had to look away. I fixed my glare back at the safety of the foot. You can't look at her, can you? Dorian whispered, leaning over towards me. How the hell did he know? No, I grumbled. You know, Ozzy, this will be the last time you'll get to see her. You might as well go ahead. She looks fine, like she always did. He wrapped his cool hand around mine and pulled me to him. He didn't let go as he motioned towards her. "I don't want to lecture you. I don't want to tell you how to mourn, but I know if you don't do this, you're going to regret it." I glanced around nervously, not wanting to look at her, but Dorian squeezed my hand. "Trust me," I sighed, and slowly drew my eyes down towards the open part of the coffin. And there she laid, my sister. And she looked like she was just sleeping. Her skin was creamy and pale and looked smooth to the touch. Her blonde hair was combed out in waves that rested over the bow ties of her white dress. She was so still, but so Hunter. At that point, I could feel the tears welling in my eyes. A childish and innocent part of me just wanted to shake her and beg for her to wake up. I knew better, though. I knew that such a thing wouldn't work, even though I wanted nothing more. I just wanted this to be a bad dream. And in the morning, I'd wake up, call my sister on the phone, and we'd laugh about my silliness. It was just false hope. And then Dorian squeezed my hand. I blinked, forcing the tears back before looking away. I turned my gaze on him, and he smiled. Deep inside, a part of me felt better. I glanced back at Hunter. "Goodbye," Dorian whispered down to his friend. His tone was sad, but strength drowned it out. "Goodbye," I uttered too. I didn't care if I was supposed to or not, but I shut the lid of the coffin. When I looked back at my new friend, he was smiling. He released his grasp and crossed his arms. "Hunter would be proud," he said confidently, smiling down at me. I just nodded, turning my gaze to the crowd of people. I caught a glimpse of my mother and read in her gaze, "I'm just going to go meddle and see who it is that my daughter is talking to." I sighed. Fortunately, Dorian seemed to decipher the look too. She turned to her friends to dismiss herself. "Great, she's going to come over here to see who you are." He hummed a low laugh. "Not today, she's not." He looked down into my eyes. "I am going to go." A part of me wanted to beg him to stay, but I said nothing. "I will see you tomorrow at the funeral, Ozzy." He began to move away from me. "Tell Shane I said hi." He moved and paced towards the exit. "Ophelia!" I heard my mother call. I glanced over to look at her, but when I looked back towards him, he was gone, as if he had just vanished. "Ophelia," my mother said, stopping in front of me. "Who was that?" I glanced up into her blue eyes and shrugged. "That was Dorian," I said simply, before turning from her and walking away.